Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, quick match gameplay. As you can see here, in this matchup of Wood Elves against Beastmen, we've gone very, very thin. So, having seen Durthu's success against the Beastmen in my prior matchup, as well as his success against my builds when I play as the Beastmen myself, and just how potent he can be, I decided to do a build that was sort of centered around him and a very small hero squad as the core of my army. If you look at the numbers, you can see my allied troop count is only 300, whereas my opponent is almost sitting at 1200. So definitely some rough stuff. So without further ado, let's kind of jump right in. Durthu, I did choose him because he's crazy. He's very hard for the Beastmen to kill because he's got 100 armor, he's got 20% physical resist, he's got 15% missile resist. So even against throwing axes, he's got built-in basically 35% missile resist. He causes fear and terror, which Beastmen are very bad against. He's got frenzy. He's a monster in melee. He'll take on any Beastman Lord and win in a straight up fight. He can trash Gorbals. He can destroy Minotaurs. There's basically nothing the Beastman can put on the field that it's a major threat to him except throwing axes, or just sheer numbers and shattering the rest of his army. Alongside that, I did bring Flock of Doom. I did bring Wissen's Wild Form just for those decent sort of cheapish buffs and for melting mobs, as well as the Sword of Death. And this is basically another Flock of Doom. So my idea was that I would try to get my opponent to ball up around Durthu and the Tree Man and the Branch Wraith here, and take advantage of that to nuke him down with Sword of Death and Flock of Doom. I also do have Foe Seeker, just to keep his vigor up, keep him from breaking too easily, and just keep him to stick around. And then Lamentation of Despair, which is a nice little missile attack that is fairly cheap and is one of the few damage abilities that still isn't limited by charges. So it can do quite a bit of damage over the course of a game. Alongside him, I do have a Branch Wraith to give me that bonus, again, that bonus melee attack, as well as that debuffing enemies nearby to magic resist with their magic resist, which for Durthu and for the Tree Man is actually an immense buff to their melee damage. There, you're looking at a bump of like 100 or so damage effectively, with the other Trickster's Shard in play. I also did bring Earthblood, which obviously just to heal up my troops, most importantly Durthu and the Goon Squad here, but also if I needed to heal up my peripheral cavalry here, and then Melkoth's Mystifying Asna to slow my opponent down. The rest of my army is all cavalry, so you can see two Sisters of the Thorn, perhaps a little overkill, but these guys, Sisters of the Thorn, thanks to their monstrous melee, not melee stats, but monstrous physical resist, they're actually a decent melee unit, and honestly their melee attack and melee defense aren't too terrible either. So especially against hounds, they'll do okay. They've got decent missile damage, and I really need them and the two units of Glade Riders with Hagbane tips to deal with my opponent's skirmish troops, specifically those Centaurs with throwing axes, who pose the greatest threat to my Tree Man and Durthu mob. They are backed by 3 units of Wild Riders with shields. Wild Riders, of course, will trounce any cavalry that Beastmen put on the field, so unless my opponent decided to do basically a straight Centaur build, which he would struggle to kind of shut me down on the flanks. My hope is that if my opponent balls up on Durthu, balls up on the Branch Wraith, I'll be able to nuke them down with Wild Rider cycle charging. What my opponent did, though, bit of an interesting composition. Definitely very gore heavy, which makes sense against the Wood Elves who struggle against that sort of stuff. 3 units of Harpies up in the sky here. The Harpies are in a bit of an interesting pick. They're pretty slow by any flyer standards. They've only got 82 speed, but they can definitely pressure units. They can make them sort of. They can pressure your flyers. If you bring your Hawk Riders, they can pressure them a little bit. They can pressure your skirmish cav. They can, although obviously not catch them unless you let them be caught. And they can pressure archers, of course, in your backline. So potentially a decent pick there. Behind that, my opponent also does have some more interference with 2 Chaos Warhounds. Actually, not the Poison variant. I kind of just assumed they're the Poison variant. That's what everyone brings. But 2 Vanilla Chaos Warhounds. So definitely going for a wide sort of shutdown build in case I'd brought my skirmish skirmish troops. 2 Centaurs with throwing axes. Obviously, this is a major counter to heavy troops like Durthu, and they can do okay in melee. I'm not entirely sure if they win against Glade Riders with Hagbane tips. It would probably be a very pitched fight. The Glade Riders with Hagbane tips have slightly superior melee stats, but they do have less HP. So to be fair, I'm not entirely sure who wins, but it would definitely be a very pitched fight. The main advantage, of course, is that the Glade Riders, or for me, is that the Glade Riders have much bigger range, so you can potentially snipe these guys down. For the rest of this build, my opponent did bring Malagor, popular pick. And of course here he did bring him with Savage Dominion, so that will give my opponent potentially 2 charges of Cygor summons, which against a normal Wood Elf build can be pretty nasty. It's more elite infantry, but as I haven't really bought much in the way of elite troops here, I've only brought cavalry and Durthu. There's not too many juicy targets for it, because all the targets are either hard to hit or just not really there's not really much good potential against the heroes. Front line composed of Goreherd, 5 units of them. So either way, 5 units of Goreherd backed by 2 Minotaurs, unshielded variant, so perhaps a little weak there. Personally, I would have cut off these spears to get the cut off a spear or two just to get the shields on them, because I think that's a huge buff. Minotaurs, I think baseline they're 1250, so actually single unit of Ungor spears here cut here would have been enough to get both of these guys bumped up the shields, which could make a huge difference. But front line and Goreherds, some Ungors on the periphery to provide some support, more Ungors in the back, and then a Gorebull in the center, so providing additional armor piercing and anti-large. So my opponent basically has counters to just about anything I could put on the field as the Wood Elves, and we'll definitely see how things break down. You can see the Cygor summon going down. It's my opponent's only spell, so really might as well, even if it's not doesn't have the juiciest targets. And shortly it'll start trying to poke away at my troops, but you can see it's already deteriorating, and it's going to degenerate rather quickly. Either way, my opponent is being a little cautious here. He's making sure to use those Goreherds to kind of screen away for his Minotaurs so that I can't just get cheap fire into them. And I do try to get a little bit of poke damage in there. You can see I accidentally left my free fire on, so I'm going to waste some ammo here on the Goreherd, on these kind of peripheral shielded troops. So definitely a bit of a waste of ammo, but we do get some pressure onto the Minotaurs, which is nice. That was really what I was looking to do here. Anytime my opponent is kind of posturing around with the Harpies, so things are definitely going a little slow at the beginning. Both neither me nor my opponent really wanted to commit to anything. I don't want to throw my Wild Rider straight into the fight here. You can see these guys lost 3 models already to the Cygor, so I'm going to try to kite around and go after the Cygor with some of these flankers. So definitely a lot of micro going on from both sides, as we do have quite a skirmish-heavy build, each of us. You can see I do try to get a little bit of poke there against the Minotaurs. Nothing too spectacular, but trying to get a little bit in there. And now we are simply committing. I'm going to throw my Branch Wraith in there, throw Durthu in there. I'm simply going straight from the heart of my opponent's formation, trying to get him to ball up on me, and trying to force that fight. So you can see the Branch Wraith does dive in. It's going to knock off a few models. Of course, against the Gorge, it will actually do rather well. My opponent countercharges with the Minotaurs, but in marches Big Daddy Durthu, and he is going to lay the smackdown on some of these troops. You can see just cleaving through those Gores, cleaving through those poor Beastmen, and he's going to be doing some major work. In the meantime, you can see the Cygor already degenerating incredibly quickly. I do get a little bit of flank here on these Centaurs with throwing axes, trying to pressure them down with my fire. But unfortunately, this does abandon these skirmishes over here, so I definitely should kind of try to keep my skirmish line a little more balled up. My opponent does get a few throwing axe shots in there. In the meantime, though, I hit this blob with a Curse of Honorar to debuff them and let Durthu and the Tree Man go to town on these Minotaurs, and they're doing so with relish. You can see these guys are getting absolutely pasted already, losing a lot of HP, and Durthu and the Tree Man have only just begun. So and they're already up to about 20 and 11 kills. In the meantime, over here, I'm trying to kind of run around and chase down my opponent's skirmishers. Not a bad decision, I don't think, but it does mean that my opponent is... I forgot to turn these guys on fire at will, so they're not shooting as they're pursuing, and because of that, my opponent is kind of able to get some free damage here on the Stitch of the Thorn. In the meantime, on the flank here, you can see my opponent is using his infantry to pressure my cavalry, trying to zone them away. While in the center, I do drop the double whammy of nukes, Overcast Flock of Doom, as well as the Sword of Death, and immediately my opponent's army of these Ungors start to break. So my opponent does throw his Gorebull in there, trying to stiffen up these Minotaurs, but they are not having a good time. The Tree Man doesn't have armor piercing damage, but Minotaurs, none of the variants of Minotaurs have good armor. They've only got 35 and 45 armor, I think, on the shielded variant. So the Tree Man is able to do a lot of work. So is Durthu. They both have very high melee defense, so they're very hard for all these units except the Gorebull to hit, and they're doing a very good job in there. In the meantime, over here in the pits, my opponent has finally caught my skirmishers, or more accurately, I let him catch my skirmishers, and because I simply realized that I needed to get rid of them. And so they do get pincered. I do hit them with the Curse of Honorar, so they can't do too much damage with the spears, and then collapse on them with Wild Riders. And you can see immediately these Harpies with their low morale routing. Wild Riders, of course, do cause fear, one of their great perks, and they do start routing these troops rather quickly. You can see the Ungor spears with their low morale also buckling under the onslaught, and once these troops are all forced off, I'm going to be in a much better position. In the meantime, these Gores are getting chipped away at. You can see these Harpies completely shattered. Some of these Harpies do get clear though, wavering, but I do try to keep pressuring them with the skirmish troops. However, this does mean I might have abandoned this flank. You can see the Tree Man has taken immense damage from the Gorebull. Really, that's kind of what the Gorebull is meant for. That's one of the situations where he will really shine against the Tree Man. And if we look at the stats, I'm not entirely sure how big of a bonus against large. He's got bonus against large of 30, so he's got almost a 50% chance of hitting the Tree Man. Obviously, the Tree Man doesn't have the greatest melee attack himself, and of course, most of his damage is not armor piercing, so against the Gorebull, not doing the greatest damage. But in the same time, the Minotaurs are getting massacred, and these guys still have a lot of HP left. So despite all that damage they're taking, they still have a long way to go before they're down for the count. Over here, my opponent does land a nasty hit against the Sister of the Thorn, and I made a bit of a mistake here, not just engaging on these Chaos Warhounds. Well, I simply could have. I let myself get caught. I let them get the charge off, and they're going to start massacring my Glade Riders with Hagbanes. Over here, though, these Harpies are getting zoned off. I don't think they'll actually flee off the field, but, you know, they're getting routed. While over here, the Wild Riders kind of trying to make their way around and trying to pressure my opponent's skirmish troops before they massacre Durthu and the gang. Over here, the Gorbel does dive out in one of his animations. You can see I do get some Wild Riders into the back here, trying to get these cycle charges, but my opponent is definitely blocking me up with these Gorbel with the shields, and I wasn't paying attention to that micro because I was focused elsewhere, trying to save my skirmish contingent here against the Warhounds. What I really should have done is thrown the Sisters of the Thorn in. The Sisters of the Thorn with their 50% missile or physical resist would do great against the Chaos Warhounds, and then kind of just collapse them that way. In the meantime, though, in the heart of things, you can see Durthu doing a rather great job. These Minotaurs buckling, they're down to 6 models. These guys are down to 5, and they have basically no HP left. And the Tree Man is still sitting at over 2,000 HP, so still a decent amount of survivability there. And as these last sort of vestiges of my opponent's troops disappear, he's going to be left with Gores, so can't really do the job, and a Gorbel, not the greatest choice there either. But you can see his Sword of Death going down slowly but surely, just chipping away, doing hundreds of damage per tick on these Ungor Spears, on these Gores, and on all these troops. And you can see it immediately does break those Minotaurs down to 2 models, and they just break, and that's just going to leave the Gorbel in a terrible position because he's cut off. Over here, though, you can see I'm repeatedly letting my Wild Riders get caught by these Gores because I'm just not on top of my micro. Big mistake on my part, and definitely I'm paying for it. Over here, in the meantime, the Harpies are getting zoned away once again. I'm just piling into the Chaos Warhounds using my melee. Glade Riders are a passable melee unit, and the Sisters of the Thorn are above average skirmisher as far as melee goes, so I'm able to kind of pressure these Warhounds off, kind of able to beat them down, and I really need to get rid of those skirmish troops because right now you can see those axes flying in, and the Tree Man, despite that 35% built-in missile resist and the 100 armor, is going to die pretty quickly. However, for my opponent, the Gorbel is not having a good day. He's down to 1 model. He's down to well, actually, he's always down to 1 model, but he's only down to 362 HP. He does now break, and he's down. If he comes back, Durthu can slap him once, and he's dead. Now, my opponent is focusing all his fires on the Tree Man. In my opinion, this was a little bit of a mistake. Should have probably focused on Durthu, but the Tree Man being much lower is a more appealing choice, I suppose. Regardless, the Wild Riders do get into the backline. Some of them do rout because they have Frenzy, so normally they aren't susceptible to Fear and Terror, but here their Frenzy wore off, so they're routed. But I'm trying to get us around on the Cygor. Unfortunately, I'm not force pathing around, and because of that, the Cygor is going to stick around. Just beat these guys to pulp. I do believe they'll tear it down eventually because it's got terrible melee defense, but it's going to be rough. A second unit of Wild Riders are running around the flank, trying to shut the Cygor down. I want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. This has been the second Cygor my opponent summoned this game, I do believe. Regardless, you can see here in the pits trying to get an Earthblood in there, trying to heal the Tree Man up. Earthblood is not really, or actually just Shield of Thorns from the Sisters, trying to keep these guys alive. But nonetheless, that chip damage and honestly some friendly fire is not doing me any favors. In the meantime, on the periphery, though, my opponent's skirmish force has finally essentially been broken. The 2 Chaos Warhounds over there being a bit of a nuisance, but we are able to pressure these Gores down a little bit, and we'll be able to start chipping away these Centaurs with throwing axes, who do not have good survivability, but obviously you can see they're chipping away at this Tree Man, they're chipping away at the Branch Wraith. I do believe I got another Earthblood in there that we just missed, but we are trying to get these guys down. You can see my Wild Riders being zoned away, and I make a big mistake here. Once again, not paying attention to micro, letting these guys who routed once get caught, and had I simply microed them away earlier, had I been on top of that, I could have kited them away, gotten their morale back, and come at them from a different angle, and I just didn't. You can see another Earthblood does go down here. The Tree Man is back over 1,000 HP, which is nice. Earthblood, though, doesn't last very long. It's only a 6-second cast, so it only gives me about 300 HP back. We're nowhere near our healing caps, really, so if I had more healing, I could heal a whole bunch, but you can see all the throwing axes just piling in, doing an immense amount of work. Durthu over here is not going to let this go unpunished. He does throw in a Lamentation of Despair, which clears out a few Centaurs, but on the meantime, my opponent is pressuring me with Goreherd. And I was forced to chase away some of these hounds with in melee. So you can see at this point I'm basically out of ammo, down to 4 rounds on some of these troops, while my opponent is slowly but surely chipping away at this Tree Man, who's down to 48 HP, and he finally topples over. And you can see he has taken a beating. You got Wood Elf arrows sticking out of him. You got all these throwing axes that brought him low. So laid the giant low, poor guy. But he put up a great fight. And now my opponent really doesn't have the ammo to bring Durthu down. Durthu's up to over 200 kills. He's got about almost 3,000 HP. And these guys, even if every shot was hitting, which it isn't obviously, and even if they had full models, they would struggle to put Durthu down. And I don't really think they can, especially now with my light calf opening fire on these guys. And as their morale drops, they are going to lose their the Centaurs with throwing axes will lose their a special ability. They've got a little perk here. I got not perfect vigor. Perfect vigor lasts as long as their they've got that one lasts as long as their leadership isn't wavering. But they've got primal fury. So once they lose that, they're going to lose their speed, and that means my skirmish cav is going to be able to catch them. They're going to be able to run them down. So you can see over here the Sisters of the Thorn, they finally run out of ammo on these Centaurs with throwing axes. My Sisters of the Thorn are going to pull them away a little bit, and then they're simply going to re-engage on them. Because, you know what, Sisters of the Thorn, once again, they've got better melee stats than the Centaurs. If the Centaurs start losing morale-wise, they're going to completely the Centaurs will completely buckle, and I do get a rear charge in with this depleted unit of Glade Riders, so that's going to buckle their morale. Once they lose that leadership, they lose Primal Fury, and they're going to be completely susceptible. So at this point, it's a little bit of Benny Hill action, as my skirmishers are zoning away these Centaurs with throwing axes, who are wasting their ammo on the skirmishers. I run down these Ungors, a little bit risky. I definitely should have tried to pincer there, but it doesn't really matter. Malagor routes, because of course Durthu is Durthu, and that is the end of the game. So definitely Fortress Durthu paid off. It was a lot of fun. It was a very tight match and a very challenging match in some ways because there was a lot of micro going on. There was a lot of cavalry units kind of all over the place, both for me and my opponent. My opponent, of course, bringing basically 7 units that could be considered skirmishers and or skirmish type light cav units, and was pressuring me while I was trying to pressure him, and back and forth. Obviously, I need to keep Durthu and the Goon Squad here alive as long as possible, and it definitely paid off. You can see Durthu here with over 200 kills. The Branch Wraith and the Tree Man, not that impressive, but you know what? They crushed the Minotaurs. That was the main thing. They crushed the Minotaurs, they crushed the Gorbel, they gave Durthu that advantage against the units meant to kill him, and did an okay enough job. It was obvious that Durthu's spells were really going to be the main source of damage, and the Wild Riders were going to be the main source of damage against light Beastmen infantry, and that's definitely what happened. In the end, you can see that we both lost the vast majority of our army. I lost about 2/3. My opponent lost even more than that. So about 3/4. So my opponent took about 3/4 losses, where I took about a 2/3 loss, almost 2/3 losses. So definitely some rough stuff. And definitely kind of showed that Fear and Terror can mess Beastmen up, and how much they struggle to bring down these powerful single entities, especially when they can't rely on their sort of Centaurs with great weapons or something on it. Because if my opponent brought Centaurs with great weapons, obviously they're not a good choice against Wood Elves to begin with, but Eddie brought Centaurs with great weapons, they get routed incredibly easily. You definitely want the Minotaurs because they'll duel a little better, they don't rout as easily. So it's a rough position. There's definitely not that much Beastmen can do. As long as you can get rid of these throwing axes, Durthu and his magic, even if you lose the rest of your army here, Durthu and the Goon Squad can hold out for an incredibly long time, and they can repeatedly terror out you. So it's definitely some rough stuff, and definitely abusing some poor beast abuse here. So regardless, I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining, and perhaps gives you some inspiration on the Wood Elf versus Beastmen matchup. Obviously, I think this is actually a rather competitive build against Beastmen. Perhaps I'd drop some of the Sisters of the Thorn in favor of more Glade Riders or more Wild Riders, not entirely sure. Just to get an extra unit of Wild Riders in there. But regardless, I think this is a pretty competitive build. I do, and even though it seems trolly, I do think it's something you can make viable in basically no matter what your opponent brings. Even if they say bring Bestigors, you can do some chip damage with your throwing weapons. Bestigors will, if they try to mob Durthu, he nukes them down, and Wild Riders can still cycle charge Bestigors in the rear. So it's not likely your opponent will bring more than a few, say 3 Bestigors, because obviously Way Watchers and Starfire Shafts mess them up. So regardless, good game to my opponent. Flip here was a very close and very fun match. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I do hope you found it entertaining, and perhaps give you some ideas. And if you have any comments, criticism, anything like that, be sure to put those down in the comments, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.